Week 10 of the 2014 NFL season is upon us. We're approaching the stretch run, but still plenty of football left to be played. A little bit of a light week this week. 6 teams on bye means there's only 13 games. Still several interesting matchups, and I would like to talk about a few of them now quickly. Want to remind you that we get into all these games in great detail here at BETDAQ Tips, so we do hope you check back with us over the next couple of days. But let's talk about a few of these games now, shall we? Starting with the London game. The NFL making its return to London this week, where the Dallas Cowboys will face the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jags now a yearly visitor to London. Last season they were smoked by San Francisco, and this year they get a 6-3 Dallas team. Fortunately for the Jags, though, they might get the Cowboys without starting quarterback Tony Romo. Romo missed last week's loss to Arizona, officially listed as questionable here with his back injury. Now, based on the talk coming out of Dallas, it sounds like Romo might play. Sounds like head coach Jason Garrett is preparing as if Romo will play. Personally, though, I'd be very surprised if Romo does play. The Cowboys will probably be able to take care of business against the Jags even without Romo. And if he does sit this game, because Dallas has a bye next week, that will give him a full 3 weeks to rest that back before coming back into the lineup. So I do think we're going to see Brandon Weeden at quarterback for Dallas, but don't know that for sure. Romo officially listed as questionable, and that is why there is no line currently on BETDAQ for this game, because we don't know whether Romo is going to play or not. Now, sportsbooks around the world that are offering a line on this game, currently offering either Dallas -6, Dallas -7, somewhere in that area. Listen, I expect this line to fall at Dallas -6 or 6.5 if it's going to be Brandon Weeden. If we find out Romo is going to play, I think it might move to Dallas -7.5, somewhere in that area. Cowboys have lost a couple of games in a row now. Their offense clearly not the same with Brandon Weeden under center. And the Jacksonville Jaguars have shown some signs of life lately. They covered last week, losing by 10 in Cincinnati as an 11-point dog. Won a couple of weeks ago against the Cleveland Browns, beating the Browns 24-6. Still, the Jaguars 1-8 this season, 3-6 against the spread, 32nd, dead last in points scored, 30th in points allowed. So I'd be very, very careful before throwing money at this Jacksonville team, regardless of who is playing quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. But as we said, the Jags did pull out a cover last week, and they will be a fairly substantial underdog for this game. Let's move on now. One of the more interesting games of the week will take place in New Orleans between two 4-4 teams. Now, before the season, you'd be surprised that either one of these teams was 4-4 in Week 10. I'm talking, of course, about the San Francisco 49ers and the New Orleans Saints, two teams who are viewed as Super Bowl favorites heading into the season. Now, these teams are a different type of 4-4. The Saints finally have it rolling a little bit. They've won 2 straight, 3 out of their last 4. Their only loss in that 4-game stretch, a 1-point loss on the road to the Detroit Lions. Detroit has been playing very well this season. The Niners, on the other hand, they've lost a couple of games in a row, including a disgusting loss to the St. Louis Rams last week. They seem to be moving in the wrong direction. You're starting to hear reports now of discord in the locker room. Jim Harbaugh might have one foot out the door. Jerry Rice earlier today, or maybe yesterday, it was reported, I saw it today anyway, saying that he believes Jim Harbaugh will leave the San Francisco 49ers regardless of what happens this season, and he thinks that is affecting the team a little bit, affecting the chemistry in the locker room. Of course, what's affecting the team probably more is the injuries and absences they've had, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Even with those injuries, though, the 49ers still playing well on defense, 2nd in total defense, 5th in points scored. Same old story with this team. Their defense is ahead of their offense, but this season their offense just hasn't been able to be quite what it has been in years past, especially with the running game. Usually the Niners a top 5 rushing offense. This season they're not in the top 10. They're bottom half of the NFL in total offense, passing offense, and points scored. That being said, San Francisco is the type of team that generally gives the New Orleans Saints trouble. A physical run-first team, and the Saints and 49ers have squared off 4 times since 2010. The Saints have not won any one of those games by more than 3 points. They are a 4.5 point favorite, this Sunday on BETDAQ. 49 the total in this game. So the Saints covering in this game, the Saints winning by more than 4.5, would be a little bit unusual based on what we've seen in recent years in this rivalry. Last year, these two teams met in New Orleans. Saints pulling out a 3-point victory, weren't quite able to pull out the cover. That being said, as we mentioned, The 49ers not quite themselves this season. They seem to be regressing, especially on the offensive side of the ball, just not as good as they have been in years past. And the Saints do seem to have it together. In their last home game, they pulled out a 21-point victory over a red-hot Green Bay Packers team. So even with a 4.5-point number, and even knowing that the Saints have had trouble covering numbers like that against the San Francisco team in recent years, I think it's going to be tough for me to turn away from the New Orleans Saints in this spot. Now, hey, a couple of weeks ago, someone accused me of nearly always backing the Saints in the Superdome. I thought about that, and you know what? That's pretty much right. I do nearly always get behind the Saints in the Superdome, but when you see that this team is 19-6 against the number in their last 25 home games, despite being favored in 23 of those 25 home games, I mean, how do you not like backing this team at home? The Saints nearly always cover at home. I do expect them to get the cover this Sunday at home as a 4.5-point favorite against the San Francisco 49ers, even though it's a backs-against-the-wall situation for the Niners. Maybe the first true backs-against-the-wall situation since Jim Harbaugh has been coach of that team. The team is in crisis now. So if you're a real believer in the 49ers and in what Jim Harbaugh is doing there, you're probably going to get behind them as a 4.5-point dog against a New Orleans team that, even though they've got it together recently, the Saints have been an overall disappointment this year. Let's move on, shall we? Maybe the best game of this Week 10 will take place in Detroit. And I'll tell you what, a month ago, if someone would have told you that the best game of Week 10 would have been the Dolphins-Lions, you probably wouldn't have believed them. But that is the reality we're dealing with now. The Dolphins going on the road to face the Detroit Lions, probably the week's best matchup. Detroit a 2.5-point favorite on BETDAQ, 43.5 the total here. No team hotter in the NFL right now than the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins playing so well. They've won 3 straight, 4 of their past 5. Their only loss in that stretch, coming that last-second loss to the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers throwing a touchdown pass with no time left. So Dolphins playing very well. They beat the San Diego Chargers 37-0 last week. They're really getting it done on both sides of the ball, but it's their defense that deserves top billing. Miami third in the NFL in both total yards allowed and points allowed, and they lead the NFL in yards per play allowed. The Dolphins surrendering just 4.7 yards per play. They're facing a Detroit offense here that has really been struggling this season. The Lions not very good on that side of the ball. Now Detroit as a whole has been very good, 6-2 on the year, and they're coming off a bye here, which is why they're favored, despite the fact the Dolphins have been red hot, as we mentioned. But the Detroit offense, 24th in points scored. They're only averaging 20.2 points per game, and they are totally one-dimensional. They have not been able to run the football at all, 31st in rush yards per game. However, they can still pass the ball a little bit, and they will be getting their best offensive player, maybe the best wide receiver in the entire NFL. I'm talking, of course, about Megatron Calvin Johnson. He will be back this week after missing the last few games with an ankle injury. So this is going to be a great test. This is going to be strength versus strength. This Detroit passing attack now with Calvin Johnson back in the fold against this Miami defense. As we mentioned, the Dolphins third in both total defense and points allowed, first in yards per play allowed, and they're second in passing defense. So the secondary is the strength of this Miami defense. Be very interesting to see if Detroit can get anything going on the offensive side of the ball. Now, they might not have to get much going, because even though the Dolphins have been rolling on offense, they produced 37 points last week against the San Diego Chargers, they haven't yet faced a defense like the Detroit Lions. We just went on about the Miami defense. Well, the Lions lead the NFL in both yards allowed and points allowed. They're surrendering just 15.8 points per game. And the strength of this Detroit defense is against the run. They're only allowing 74 rush yards per game right now. Just so happens the strength of the Miami offense is their running game. Fourth in the NFL in rush yards per game. Doing a lot of read option stuff, doing some real cool things in the running game under first-year coordinator Bill Lazor. If you haven't seen the Dolphins play over the last few weeks, you should do yourself a favor and watch them. Almost feels like you're watching a college team, a Big 12 team from time to time. But like we said, it has been very effective this season. Will it be effective, though, against this stout Detroit front seven? I've seen Detroit play several times this season, and even though the Dolphins have been running the ball so well lately, it's difficult to imagine them having a whole lot of success running the ball against the Detroit Lions. So for the Dolphins, I believe in this game it's going to come down to the right arm of Ryan Tannehill. Is Tannehill good enough to win a game on the road against a quality opponent when he's forced, when he's backed into a corner and forced to throw the ball to win the game, when he doesn't have that running game to rely on. We'll find out. I personally am a Tannehill believer. I have an early lean towards Miami in this game, though I highly doubt it's going to be one of my best bets. I think I'll be a spectator in this one. But as we said, it is Week 10's best matchup. Miami Dolphins going to Detroit to face the Lions. Should be a good one. Let's talk about both primetime matchups now, shall we? The Sunday night game and the Monday night game. I think these two games have a lot of similarities because they both feature teams that were expected to be very good this season, going on the road, perhaps fighting for their lives. The Sunday night game, the Chicago Bears going on the road to face division rival Green Bay. Packers a 7.5-point favorite on BETDAQ, 52.5 the total. The Packers, of course, were expected to be good this season, and they have been good. After a little bit of a slow start, they're 1-2 through 3 games. They really have it rolling now. They've won 4 out of their past 5. They did lose their last game on the road in New Orleans, but coming off a bye, we expect them to be ready at home for their division rival Bears. The Bears, on the other hand, disintegrating. They've lost 4 of their past 5 games. They're also coming off a bye, so they've had an opportunity to get it together, but they haven't been good on either side of the ball. 29th in points allowed. This defense is brutal. They're surrendering 27.8 points per game. But the most disappointing thing about this Chicago season has been the play of their offense. Their offense that is just loaded with skill position talent and was so good last season, coached by a guy, Mark Trestman, head coach of the Bears, of course, who's known to be an offensive guy. He brought his system in last year, and Jay Cutler took pretty well to it. The Bears were top 5 in points scored all season. Right now, though, just not working on offense. 19th in points scored, also bottom half of the league in total yards per game, pass yards per game. Jay Cutler not having a particularly good year. You're hearing rumors of discord and discontent in that Chicago locker room. Maybe some unhappiness with the coaching staff. Brandon Marshall a couple of weeks ago calling out other players apparently in a post-game tirade. It just has not been pretty for the Chicago Bears. It's now or never for them, I believe. Backs against the wall. Not sure they're going to go on the road and beat Green Bay, but getting a whopping 7.5 points here, to me, it's a referendum on the Chicago Bears. If this team is truly going down the tubes, and if this is going to be Mark Trestman's last season as coach, which some things we've heard talked about over the past few days, then the Bears will most likely get blown out here by a good Green Bay team. However, the Packers are very vulnerable on the defensive side of the ball. Not particularly good on defense. 25th in total defense. 32nd, dead last against the run. Chicago, of course, has a Pro Bowl running back in Matt Forte who has picked it up in recent weeks. So this Chicago offense should be able to do some things against this Green Bay defense. 7.5, a lot of points. So listen, if the Bears still have some fight left in them, if they're going to put forth a championship effort, if they're going to put forth the effort we expected them to put forth, if they're going to be the team we expected them to be prior to the season, over the second half of the season, I think it's going to start right here on the road in Green Bay. And if you're a believer in the Bears and in this offense and in what they can maybe do, this might be a good spot here. 7.5 point dog could be a good buy low time for the Chicago Bears. I don't often bet on the Bears because I'm not a big fan of Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler has been a losing bet throughout his NFL career. However, in this spot, I am going to think about it just because they do have so much potential on that offense. We have seen that offense look so good at times last year and at times this year. And Green Bay, very vulnerable on the defensive side of the ball. Just feels like 7.5, a lot of points. Seems to me, though, if you're going to like Chicago here, part and parcel with that, you should like the over as well. 52.5, the total on BETDAQ. I do not think the Bears are going to slow down this Green Bay offense. So if the Bears are going to be able to cover the 7.5, it's going to be because their offense does enough to stick around. So again, maybe an early lean towards Chicago here, though I'm not sure I'm going to be able to follow through on that and trust Jay Cutler. But if I do like the Bears, rest assured that I will also like over 52.5. Last game I'd like to talk about here briefly, the Monday night game. As I mentioned, a lot of similarities to the Sunday night game, the Chicago-Green Bay game, in that here you have a team that was expected to be good heading into the season, in this case the Carolina Panthers, going on the road with maybe their season on the line. The Panthers 3-5-1 now. They've fallen out of first place in the dreadful NFC South, and it seems like the New Orleans Saints have finally found their footing. So if the Panthers want to keep pace in the division, they better start winning quickly. going on the road to face a Philadelphia Eagles team that will be without their starting quarterback. Eagles a 6-point favorite on BETDAQ, 48 the total. Nick Foles leaving last week with a collarbone injury, replaced by Mark Sanchez. Now, Sanchez played well last week in relief of Foles. Eagles, of course, pulling out a win over the Houston Texans. Still, we've seen plenty of Mark Sanchez, plenty of this guy in the NFL. I don't think that Chip Kelly sprinkled some magic pixie dust over Sanchez. Be very hesitant about backing the Mark Sanchez-led Philadelphia Eagles until I see it a little while, until I see it for a couple of games. You know, Mark Sanchez, he just ripped out bettors' hearts so many times when leading the New York Jets. This guy, very turnover-prone, facing a Carolina defense this season, facing a Carolina defense that has really had trouble this season, but the Panthers were really good on defense last year, and much of the personnel remains. And it's not like Carolina has been consistently awful this season. We've seen them at times look pretty much like they looked last year, including a couple of weeks ago when they held the Seattle Seahawks to just 13 points. So look, I think it's going to come down to whether Philadelphia is going to be able to run the ball in this game. The Eagles started slowly in terms of on the ground this season, dealing with injuries on the offensive line, but they've picked it up of late. Now, the Panthers have not been good against the run this year, 26th against the run. But as we said, the personnel remains in that front seven. They should be better against the run than they are, based on what we saw last year when they finished second in both yards allowed and points allowed, and based on, frankly, what we saw early this season and what we've seen in spurts this season. Now Carolina's defense faces a hobbled Philadelphia offense, a Philadelphia offense that features a backup quarterback, a Philadelphia offense that is still not 100% healthy on the offensive line. Can this Carolina defense step up here? Can they limit the Philadelphia offense? They're going to have to, because the Panthers not good on the offensive side of the ball, 25th in points scored. Of course, the Panthers also 25th in points allowed. This team, 25th in points allowed, 25th in points scored. They're surrendering just about 7 more points per game than they score. So maybe this is just a solidly below average team that is on the fast track to 6-10. If you believe that's the case, you probably lean towards Philadelphia -6 here. Probably think it's good value, this line being kept at 6, maybe because Mark Sanchez starting in place of Nick Foles, even though based on what we saw last week, the Eagles offense might not miss a beat with Sanchez under center. So listen, if you're down on the Panthers, which I have been for much of the year, you might say, hey, here's an opportunity to back to back the Eagles at home as a favorite of less than a touchdown. People are going to be doubting them because Mark Sanchez is starting, but we saw last week that Mark Sanchez might be just as good as Nick Foles in this Philadelphia offense. On the other hand, if you're looking at the other side of this game, you might say, listen, here's a limited Philadelphia offense. The Eagles have sort of skated by in a lot of their games this season, including last week, quite frankly. Carolina, if they're ever going to get it together on defense, this an excellent opportunity. Philadelphia is still shorthanded on the line. Like we mentioned, Mark Sanchez under center. And the Eagles, vulnerable defensively, 22nd in total defense. So if Cam Newton and that Carolina offense, if they're ever going to get it going, then maybe it will be this week. They do have their backfield healthy again. D'Angelo Williams, Jonathan Stewart, both healthy and active this week. So listen, to me, as I mentioned with the Sunday night game and the Chicago Bears, this Monday night game, a referendum on the Carolina Panthers. If the Carolina Panthers are going to be competitive over the second half of the season, I believe it's going to start this week, and they're going to put up a fight on the road against the Philadelphia Eagles. On the other hand, if the Panthers are going down the road of double-digit losses, they're probably going to get blown out in this game. The Eagles certainly have it rolling this season, even though, as I mentioned, they've skated by a couple of times. This is a playoff team, a contending team with an excellent offense. Philly, 4th in total offense, also 4th in points scored. We'll see how that offense is with Mark Sanchez under center. Early returns look pretty good. And as we said, the Panthers have struggled on defense this year. So we'll see what we get out of this Philly offense on Monday night. Well, those are just a few of these Week 10 games. As I said earlier, we preview all these games in great detail here at BETDAQ Tips. So please do check back with us over the next couple of days. And be sure to check back on BETDAQ for updated lines and markets, because they will be changing and updated over the next few days. Until then, until we see you for the game previews or maybe for our live show on Sunday, please check us out for that too. We're on 12 Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. That is an hour before the 1 o'clock games start every single Sunday, live for our pregame show. So please check back with us for that. Check back with us for our game previews. Until we see you some other time for BETDAQ NFL, I'm John Arnette.